Listen, you can call it a crisis, a phase, or a silent rebellion, but something is changing quietly all around us. People are walking away, not from love, not from connection, but from the noise. For the first time in a long time, being alone isn't seen as failure. It's starting to look like freedom. They're not bitter, they're not broken, they're simply exhausted from a world that never stops talking. Every second, someone is selling you a version of happiness, of success, of belonging. It's an endless pitch. The world keeps shouting, and at some point, people just stopped listening. It used to mean something when you said, "I'm busy." Now it's a badge of emptiness. You can be surrounded by people, by conversations, by followers, and still feel like you're nowhere at all. So they're choosing something different, something quieter. They turn off the phone, they close the door, they sit with the silence that once scared them. And what they discover there is unsettling, because it isn't emptiness they find, it's clarity. For years, we were told that being alone made us losers, that isolation was the proof of a life gone wrong. But maybe the lie wasn't solitude. Maybe the lie was that constant connection would make us whole. They've started to notice how every advertisement, every slogan, every influencer whispers the same command: never be alone. It kept us consuming, chasing, pretending we were part of something bigger while feeling smaller every day. There's a quiet kind of rebellion happening, one that doesn't trend, doesn't shout, doesn't ask for permission. It's the rebellion of turning inward. They didn't walk away from people, they walked away from the noise. And that decision, simple, quiet, uncelebrated, might be the most radical thing a person can do today. Because being alone used to mean you were broken. Now it might mean you're finally whole. From the moment we were born, someone was always there. A parent, a teacher, a screen. The world never let us sit in silence long enough to meet ourselves. We were taught that being alone was dangerous, that silence meant something was wrong, that you had to fill every gap in your day with noise, with people, with work, with anything that could drown out the quiet. In school, we learned teamwork before we ever learned self-awareness. In society, we were rewarded for visibility, not for understanding. The more eyes on you, the more valuable you were. The more approval you got, the safer you felt. But there's a cost to that kind of safety. When your worth depends on being seen, you'll do anything to stay visible. You'll trade truth for validation, peace for attention, and authenticity for applause. You'll call it confidence, but deep down, it's dependency. We were raised to fear silence because silence can't be sold. You can't sell stillness. You can't monetize presence. The moment you stop consuming, the system stops working. So it keeps you busy, distracted, addicted to the next update, the next opinion, the next proof that you still matter. And we obeyed. We filled every quiet moment with noise. We turned solitude into a diagnosis. You're too quiet. You need to get out more. You should meet someone. We started to believe that being alone was a problem that needed fixing. But the truth is, silence isn't the enemy. It's the mirror. And that's why the world fears it so much. Because when you're alone long enough, you start to see things clearly. The lies, the illusions, the parts of yourself you've been trained to ignore. Plato once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." But today, we live unexamined lives because we're never left alone long enough to examine them. We're drowning in information and starving for understanding, surrounded by millions, yet disconnected from the only voice that matters, our own. And maybe that's why the world keeps you running, because stillness is dangerous. In stillness, you start to question the script. You start to wonder who wrote it. You start to see how much of your life has been borrowed from other people's expectations. This is the conditioning, the invisible training that made solitude feel like suffocation and noise feel like life. But the cracks are starting to show. People are starting to notice that constant connection hasn't brought us closer. It's pushed us further away. And for the first time, Silence doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels honest, because maybe the world was never afraid of loneliness. Maybe it was afraid of what we'd discover if we stopped running from it. It didn't happen all at once. No one woke up one morning and said, "I want to be alone." It happened slowly, one disappointment at a time. A friendship that felt shallow, a conversation that went nowhere, a room full of people that made you feel invisible. The noise that once felt alive began to sound artificial. The smiles looked rehearsed. The laughter echoed hollow. And something inside began to whisper, "Maybe I don't belong here anymore." That whisper grew louder every time you forced yourself to care about things that didn't matter, to laugh at jokes that weren't funny, to chase connections that drained more than they gave. Eventually, the fatigue outweighed the fear. People didn't disappear, they just stopped performing. They stopped explaining themselves. They stopped trying to fit into spaces that never truly saw them. For a while, it felt like loss, like stepping out of the party and realizing you weren't missed. But that emptiness, painful at first, wasn't loneliness. It was detox. The modern soul is tired of being online everywhere and present nowhere. So some began stepping back, turning off the notifications, spending a weekend alone, taking long walks without music, sitting in cafes without scrolling. And something strange happened. The world didn't end. It got quieter. And in that quiet, they found a kind of honesty that the crowd never offered. They started noticing small things again: the sound of rain, the rhythm of their own breath, the weight of peace that comes when no one is asking for a performance. Psychologists might call it withdrawal. Philosophers might call it awakening. But to those who experience it, it just feels like breathing after years of suffocation. It's not that people stopped wanting love or friendship. They just stopped wanting the kind that required them to shrink, to perform, to compromise the truth of who they are. They realized that solitude wasn't punishment, it was permission. Permission to stop pretending. Permission to exist without explanation. Permission to feel without an audience. And once you've felt that kind of peace, it's hard to go back. Because the fear of being alone begins to fade the moment you realize you were never truly yourself in the crowd. Loneliness was never the enemy. It was the doorway. And on the other side of it is something far rarer: clarity. There was a time when connection meant something, when reaching out to someone felt sacred, when a conversation could change you. But somewhere along the way, connection became a commodity. Every friendship turned into an exchange. Every message became a transaction. Every word was filtered through performance and presentation. We stopped talking to understand and started talking to be seen. Social media promised community, but what it really gave us was a marketplace of attention, a place where people sell fragments of themselves in exchange for a moment of validation, a place where even loneliness has to look good under the right lighting. We connected with thousands and lost touch with ourselves. We collected followers but forgot how to be honest. We perfected our masks until they became our faces. And the tragedy is that no one meant for it to happen. We were all just trying to belong. We wanted to feel close, to be known, to matter. But the very systems that offered connection were built to keep us addicted, not fulfilled. We learned to confuse attention with affection, to mistake recognition for intimacy, to believe that the more we share, the more we exist. But existence doesn't need an audience. It needs awareness. Somewhere the meaning of connection shifted, from soul to algorithm, from sincerity to spectacle. The louder you were, the more visible you became. The more visible you became, the less real you felt. People began to notice it in small moments. A text that went unanswered. A call that felt scripted. A friendship that lived only through notifications. That creeping sense that everyone was talking, but no one was listening. And beneath the laughter, the filters, the perfectly timed smiles, there was this quiet ache and emptiness that connection could no longer fill. Because connection built on performance doesn't heal you. It drains you. It keeps you busy while starving your soul. The truth is, connection wasn't the problem. The problem was what it became. It turned into noise, a way to hide from silence, to avoid ourselves, to keep the illusion that we're still part of something real. But connection without meaning is just consumption. And the more we consume each other's lives, the less space we have for our own. We see it everywhere. The dinner tables filled with glowing screens, the dates that feel like interviews, the laughter that sounds rehearsed, the constant need to prove you're living, even when you're barely alive. The philosophers once warned about this. They said that when a society worships appearance over essence, conversation dies. And when conversation dies, so does understanding. The psychologists would later call it emotional fatigue, the slow erosion of empathy, the inability to sit with another human being without needing to be entertained. We're living in that age now, surrounded by words, drowning in noise, starved for meaning. And slowly, people are starting to notice. They're realizing that to find truth, you have to step away from the crowd. That silence might be the only place left where honesty still exists. We thought connection would save us, but in the end, it only reminded us how disconnected we truly are. At first, the silence felt unbearable. It was too heavy, too still, too honest. You'd sit in a quiet room and every thought you'd been running from came rushing in. The noise outside was gone, but the noise inside had just begun. That's what happens when you stop running. Your mind finally catches up. Every unresolved memory, every ignored feeling, every part of you that's been waiting to be heard, steps forward. Most people mistake that moment for loneliness, but it isn't. It's the detox. It's the sound of your soul recalibrating after years of distraction. At first, the silence hurts, then it heals, and eventually, it becomes home. When you spend enough time alone, you begin to notice what the noise had been hiding all along. You start to see the difference between what's real and what's performance, between joy and stimulation, between connection and dependency. The first stage of solitude is disorientation. The second is discovery. You start to remember what it feels like to be alive without an audience. You begin to reclaim your time, your thoughts, your peace. You learn that peace is not something you find. It's something you stop interrupting. You start waking up earlier, not to get ahead, but to breathe. You start doing simple things slowly, making coffee, taking walks, reading something for no reason other than curiosity. You stop documenting your life and start living it. The world taught us to measure our worth in motion. Solitude teaches us to measure it in stillness. In stillness, you begin to recognize how little you actually need. You see that most of what you've been chasing was never for you. It was for approval, for proof that you were doing okay. But in solitude, there's no one left to impress. No scoreboard, no applause, just you, stripped of everything that isn't essential. And that's where the truth begins. The philosophers of old said that self-mastery begins in silence. The psychologists of today call it regulation, clarity, integration. But they're all pointing to the same thing, the quiet power that comes from being okay with yourself. Solitude reveals something that society hides from you, how much control you actually have. When you stop relying on noise for validation, you become untouchable. You can't be manipulated by trends or approval. You begin to act, not react. You stop chasing every impulse, every opinion, every opportunity to prove you exist, because you finally realize you always did. Peace is addictive. Once you taste it, chaos becomes intolerable. You stop confusing excitement for meaning. You start valuing calm the way you once valued success. You stop needing to be seen because presence itself becomes enough. And then something subtle shifts. The silence that once felt empty begins to feel alive. You start hearing details you never noticed before. The hum of your breath, the way sunlight moves across a wall, the quiet rhythm of your own heart. These small things become proof that life was never missing. It was just hidden beneath the noise. People fear solitude because it strips them of illusion. It forces them to face themselves. But those who endure that discomfort come out different, quieter, sharper, kinder. They learn that stillness isn't passivity, it's power under control. They stop needing to dominate or prove. Their calm becomes authority. Their restraint becomes strength. They no longer need to speak to be understood. They no longer need to win to feel worthy. They no longer need to prove that they belong anywhere because they belong to themselves. That's the power of solitude. It doesn't make you distant. It makes you real. It makes you whole. At first, the silence feels like death, but then you realize it's a rebirth, the end of one life, the beginning of another. A life that isn't lived for display, but for depth. A life that doesn't need to be validated, only experienced. A life that moves slower but feels fuller. And once you cross that threshold, once you've met the version of yourself that doesn't need the world to echo back your worth, you can never go back. Because solitude isn't the absence of connection, it's the foundation of it. When you're no longer afraid of being alone, you stop demanding that others complete you. You start meeting people not from need, but from abundance. And that's when relationships, work, love, everything finally starts to feel real again. Because now you're not reaching out to escape yourself. You're reaching out to share yourself. The moment people stop needing the system starts to panic. Society doesn't hate solitude. It fears what solitude creates. Because a person who's comfortable alone can't be controlled. You can't manipulate someone who no longer fears silence, who no longer needs approval to feel alive. We live in a world that profits from insecurity. Entire industries depend on your fear of being forgotten. So when you choose stillness over stimulation, you threaten an economy built on distraction. That's why the world romanticizes noise and pathologizes peace. It praises networking, staying social, being connected, as if stillness were a symptom. The self-sufficient person becomes a problem that needs solving. Media calls them detached. Friends call them distant. Companies call them unmotivated. But what they really are is free. And freedom looks suspicious in a culture addicted to dependence. Because when you no longer need to be entertained, you stop buying entertainment. When you no longer need validation, you stop performing for it. When you no longer need to prove yourself, you stop obeying systems that survive on your obedience. So the backlash begins. The calm are mocked. The quiet are labeled cold. Those who walk alone are told they're missing out. But deep down, everyone knows it's envy. The man who needs nothing has something the world can't sell: peace. Throughout history, the independent mind has always been a threat. From the philosophers who questioned the crowd, to the thinkers who refused to bow to fashion, every age has feared the ones who can stand apart. They remind us how fragile conformity really is. Modern culture preaches individuality but punishes it the moment it becomes real. It tells you to be yourself, then demands you monetize it. It sells you rebellion in packages, freedom in subscriptions, purpose in slogans. But real independence doesn't trend, it terrifies. Because a person who's self-contained can't be weaponized by outrage or desire. They're not moved by fear, not trapped by comparison, not distracted by the chase. They simply live on their own terms. And that's dangerous to a world that survives on keeping people restless. The world doesn't hate the loner. It fears them because their silence exposes the noise for what it is: control disguised as connection. What happens after the noise fades? After you've stopped chasing, stopped proving, stopped explaining? At first, it feels like loss. But then slowly, something else emerges. A kind of peace that doesn't depend on anything outside of you. You realize that happiness was never in the constant movement, or in the validation, or in being chosen. It was in the stillness you once feared. The stillness you avoided now becomes your teacher. You begin to see that peace isn't a place you reach. It's a way you move through the world. Quiet, grounded, unbothered. Maybe happiness was never found in being chosen. Maybe it was in choosing yourself. Solitude teaches you that life doesn't need to be loud to be meaningful. You don't need to broadcast your growth for it to be real. You don't need to be seen to exist fully. You start valuing small moments over grand ones. The weight of sunlight on your face, the sound of the morning air, the simple act of being where you are without the pull of anywhere else. The world tells you peace is passive. But peace is a discipline. It's what happens when you stop letting everything outside of you dictate everything inside of you, and that's the paradox. Peace doesn't come when life gets easier. It comes when you stop resisting what already is. When you stop running from yourself, you stop needing the world to fix you. You stop trying to make sense of things that were never yours to control. True peace is quiet strength. It's not loud or visible. It doesn't ask to be admired. It just exists, unshakable, unbought, untouched. And once you've tasted it, the old world, the loud one, the restless one, the performative one, stops making sense. You no longer crave chaos or chase the highs that always end in emptiness. You begin to crave calm, consistency, simplicity, because peace isn't boring. It's balance, it's depth, it's clarity. And in that clarity, you finally understand what solitude really is. It's not isolation, it's integration. It's the moment when the noise outside finally matches the quiet inside. And for the first time, you don't need to escape anything. You're already where you were trying to get to all along. In the end, all the noise fades. The screens dim, the voices quiet. The world keeps spinning, but slower now, as if it finally stopped asking for your attention. And there you are. Not the version you built for others, not the one you performed for approval, but the one that was waiting underneath it all. The one that never needed to be more or less, just whole. You realize you were never truly afraid of being alone. You were afraid of meeting yourself. But now you've met them, the real you. And they're not as fragile as you thought. They're calm, certain. Enough. You put the phone down. You breathe. You sit in a silence that no longer feels empty. You begin to build a life no one can take from you. A life measured not by how much you have or who sees you, but by how deeply you exist in each passing moment. Silence isn't the absence of connection. It's where real connection begins. Maybe that's what we were all searching for, not more noise, not more people, but a way back home. And home was never somewhere else. It was always here.